Let's talk about differences between leadership and management. Really, they're often used interchangeably, particularly outside of academia. They really end up getting mixed up an awful lot. Or if they are used with some distinction of differences, oftentimes the leader role is given to those at the top of an organization. Those that are more in the middle are often called managers versus the first level supervisors at the lower level. So there is some hierarchical differences, but again, the functions between leadership and management are really kind of mixed up within this framework. But when we take a look at them from a functional standpoint, they're not exclusionary, but really complementary functions. When we look at what oftentimes you're finding in academic textbooks, management has a list of specific functions that fall under the management umbrella. These can range anywhere from 4 to 12 or even 14 different types of activities that managers do. Similarly, leadership textbooks will have another list of functions that leaders do. Again, by author, it will vary from just a handful to many. What's interesting, though, is when you start comparing these lists, there's a lot of overlap. This overlap causes some questions. Then, if there's an overlap of function, are management and leadership that different other than how they might approach the role and where the emphasis is? So let me step back a little bit and let's rethink what is the core difference between leadership and management from an operations standpoint. This then causes us to think about time. Time is something that is always with us, but we rarely think about it. So let me ask you, do you think in the past? Do you live there? Do you live more in the present or in the future? You can say we obviously live in the present. That goes without saying. But do we focus on thinking about the way things were and wishing it would that way again? Or are we more visionary, thinking about the future and making decisions today relative to the impact they will have on the future? So let me step back then and put the past aside. We can't change the past. We can learn from it, but we can't change it. To the extent we learn from it, we live in the present with decisions making today having an impact on the future. To put this in the perspective then of leadership versus management, we can say that management is really more present oriented. It's the efficiency of the current operations. What can we do to maintain and improve the current operations? And oftentimes this is done through control, and the managers have this role. So let's start thinking then of management of being more present oriented and improvement oriented of what we're currently doing. This is obviously a critical component. However, moving forward, leadership comes in that we are now preparing the organization for a future. This shifts from the present to a future orientation. It shifts from efficiency to an effectiveness, long-term effectiveness. And the control really isn't there. We're now more focused with influence. So when you go from management to leadership in your thought process, then there's a number of different dimensions on how we think about that. There's also another aspect, and that management role is often an appointed role versus leadership is maybe more emergent or visionary at the top of an organization. So in rethinking this, can we say that leadership is change? Otherwise, you're managing the status quo. And the reason I say this is that when I was working on my doctorate degree, it was in an area of specialization of leadership and organizational change. And the more I studied both areas, the more I realized that they were really talking about the same area of study. So going forward then, both are needed. They're complementary functions. Leadership versus management is not really one or the other. It's both in different combinations depending upon the needs of the organization at that particular time.